Hey, what's going on, gang? Nate on the Stone here. Welcome back to my channel and to this latest edition of the Rolling Stone. And gang, it has been a chock-a-block week. It was really hard, but really fun deciding what stories we were going to talk about in this latest edition of the Rolling Stone. Quick note, we're not going to be dealing a lot with the nuts and bolts political stuff this week. That's not to say that things haven't been happening. Joe Biden, that mothball who is squatting in the Oval Office of the White House like some sort of deranged Muppet, of course, was up to his old tricks. The GOP, in a rare fit of spine, is actually maybe possibly going to oust Liz Cheney from her leadership position in the House of Representatives, showing that it does in fact have a brainstem that appears once every blue moon or so. Interesting, but we're not going to be talking about any of that again. These stories that I chose were just much more interesting, much more revealing, I thought, about where we are in the culture. So we are just going to dive right in. It is a fact that cannot be denied. Facts. Remember those things, gang? Facts. The things that you used to be able to look at a graph or a chart. You used to be able to look at a line of evidence. You look to be able, a small sliver of reality that you knew was real. Facts. That's what those used to be. It is a fact that the U.S. is seeing a rise in crime that might actually be unprecedented since the 70s. Crime might not have risen this much since the 70s. If you know definitely for sure, please let me know in the comment box below. This is actually a headline from CNN. It was published on April 3rd, so it's just over a month old, April 3rd of this year. And the headline says the U.S. saw significant crime rise across major cities in 2020, and it's not letting up. No kidding. Major American cities saw a 33% increase in homicides last year. As a pandemic swept across the country, millions of people joined protests against racial injustice and police brutality, and the economy collapsed under the weight of the pandemic, a crime surge that has continued into the first quarter of this year. 63 of the 66 largest police jurisdictions saw increases in at least one category of violent crimes in 2020, which include homicide, rape, robbery, and aggravated assault. According to a report produced by the Major Cities Chiefs Association, Baltimore City, Baltimore County, and Raleigh, North Carolina did not report increases in any of the violent crime categories. And that's because Baltimore always has high crime, so any increase was probably just lost in the shuffle. So, if your society across the board is actually suffering from an increase in crime, you would think that that would be the time to actually make a display of force for law and order, right? If there's a crime, we are going to clamp down on it. We are going to nip that in the bud. But no, actually, according to Time magazine, which more and more is actually, I think, trying to out New York Times the New York Times. According to Time magazine, in a story that was published earlier this week, the solution is actually to stop prosecuting minor crimes like misdemeanors. This is a headline that actually has to be read to be believed. Here's the headline, and it was published again earlier this week, May the 4th. So, yeah, Star Wars Day, whatever. A new study reveals that not prosecuting people for nonviolent misdemeanors may actually reduce crime. May reduce crime. That is the interesting, that is the word to keep in the back of your minds, gang. Now, this study actually says, again, that, not prosecuting people for minor misdemeanors is actually a good thing because it actually reduces crime. Here is a snippet from the actual story itself. By comparing defendants assigned to more lenient versus less lenient prosecutors, we're able to measure the effect of non-prosecution, that is, having your case dismissed at the initial arraignment hearing. these lucky defendants are 58% less likely to show up in court again in the next 2 years. It appears they are dramatically less likely to commit additional crimes. Again, appears that they are dramatically less likely to commit additional crimes. Now, it goes on to say that Suffolk County, Massachusetts, actually tried this. In January 2019, Rachel Rollins inaugurated as the new district attorney of Suffolk County. And she basically gave out a list of misdemeanors that were no longer going to be prosecuted, which included driving without the correct paperwork, possessing small quantities of prohibited substances, trespassing, and disorderly conduct. And they say that this is even better because, wouldn't you know it, 46% of the non-violent misdemeanors in Suffolk County, Massachusetts, were actually committed by minority people, like black people, even though only 24% of the county's residents are black. So, of course, not prosecuting these crimes, saying that these are not prosecutable, is going to be equitable. We are going to attain racial justice by doing this. So you have your woke factor into this. Now, the story goes on to say that some reasons for this are because if you're not prosecuted for crimes, or if the charges are dropped, then then you have no record. Actually, you don't get a mark on your record, because at least in Massachusetts, if you are arrested and then if you are brought to trial, but even if at some point between the arrest and the trial the charges are dropped, or at your trial you are found not guilty, that still remains on your record. And so then, of course, it can become harder for people to find jobs. That's getting less and less now, I think, because of the gig economy, and so much of what people do now is online. So that, I think, alleviates it a little bit. But I still understand, a lot of people, they don't make their livings online. A lot of people, they will drive trucks, or they actually will work in a brick and mortar building. So I can understand how that could actually be an area of reform. If you're arrested but the charges are dropped before you're brought to trial, or you're found not guilty, then there shouldn't be any mark on your record. Because again, like I said, if you're actually trying to get employed with a company, work in a brick and mortar building, or something that you don't own, something that's not online, something that's not just part of the gig economy, quote unquote, then yeah, employers will ask you, of course, were you ever arrested? Or they'll come to that part in your resume. Were you ever arrested? Oh, you were. Interesting. What was that for? Well, I was arrested, but I was found not guilty. So I could actually see that being an area of reform. If you're found not guilty, or if the charges are dropped, you don't get a mark on your record. But this entire idea that all of these crimes, these so-called quote-unquote nonviolent misdemeanors, should not be prosecuted is asinine to me. I'm just going to say it right out here in front, gang. It is asinine for a couple of reasons. The first reason is because when people come together in society, they expect their society to be orderly. That, as we've talked about before, gang, this is actually the first prerequisite for a civilization. A civilization has to have order. Before it can have anything else, it has to have order. Well, if you're all of a sudden going to say that things like trespassing, disorderly conduct, possession of illegal substances on your person in small quantities, of course, which means that you can ingest them, which means that those could actually lead into, the interactions or things like that. Let me find it here. The disorderly conduct, taking the drugs might lead to the disorderly conduct, or it could lead to other things. It could lead to the trespassing. It could lead to, all sorts of just uncomfortable situations, disorderly situations, then it's not fair for the people who actually call in saying, hey, someone is trespassing on my property. Hey, someone is actually, defecating in the middle of the street. Hey, you know what? These people are actually getting high in the middle of the street. They're hurting my business because now they're walking around asking all these weird questions. They're scaring away people, or they're driving people away. It's hurting my business, or, it's, hurting my home now because people are actually doing this in front of my home. So I won't be able to sell it. The value is going to go down. Plus, I'm a little nervous about sending my kids outside to play when people are actually doing this. No, sorry, there's nothing that we can do because those crimes aren't prosecutable. It is a slap in the face to actual people who walk the straight and narrow, who are trying to raise a family, make a living, legally, of course. It's a slap in the face to those people who get up every morning, as the old cliche would put it. It's a slap in the face to the people who get up every morning and actually make this country work. The people who are employed, the people who are raising a family, the people who are controlling themselves, making sacrifices, trying actually to build a life for themselves, whether they're, a legal immigrant, whether they're a native-born American citizen. It's a slap in the face to them because what the organs of law and order, and those two go together for a reason. The organs of law and order are saying, no, you know what, you're actually worth less. Your concerns are worth less than our little social experiment over here. Now, you may be saying, but Nate, 58% of the people arrested who then their crimes were not prosecuted, 58% were less likely to actually be arrested within the next 2 years, and there was less likely to actually commit additional crimes. Well, gang, this is the clever part of that story. Here is the little bait and switch, okay? So 58% less likely to commit additional crimes. Now, I'm not going to pretend that that's not an insignificant number. That is a clear majority. Absolutely. But it also means that 42% are going to keep committing more and more crimes. Okay? So it's definitely a minority. But if you're one of the people who suffers because one of those 42% actually commits a crime against you, whether it's a nonviolent misdemeanor or it's something more serious, a holdup, a break-in, or whatever, it's still not going to help you in that situation. It's still a slap in the face to you and your family. Furthermore, here it is. Here it is. Stay with me, gang. 58% of the people who are arrested but who don't have their crimes prosecuted are less likely to commit crimes. It does not actually say that less people will actually commit crimes. They're saying that it reduces crime because the people who were arrested once will then not commit more crimes. But here's the thing. Once you actually lower the permissible activity that is allowed in civilized society, the more people who will actually descend to that lowest common denominator. You want an example of this? Look no further than San Francisco. San Francisco has now said that public defecation is no longer a prosecutable crime. Prostitution is no longer a prosecutable crime. Homelessness is no longer a prosecutable crime. The intaking of illegal substances is no longer a prosecutable crime. What has happened? San Francisco, which should be a jewel of the West Coast, it really should be San Francisco should be the American equivalent of Shanghai. Shanghai, one of the old terms for it was the Pearl of the Orient, the Pearl of the East. Shanghai was so rich and opulent and lustrous. That, in a sense, is what San Francisco should be. It should be the pearl of the Pacific coast. It should be America's gem in its diadem. It should be the diadem in the Western crown of these United States. But it's not. Here is from the website lawenforcementtoday.com. San Francisco, public urination prostitution will no longer be prosecuted. This was back in November of 2019. San Francisco literally has a poop patrol service that requires city workers to clean up the streets after people use them as their personal bathrooms. And after their latest announcement, it appears as city leaders are only emboldening people to continue relieving themselves wherever they want. And it's not the only criminal behavior they'll be turning a blind eye to. San Francisco's newly elected district attorney says his new list of infractions that will not be prosecuted is an attempt at decriminalizing poverty and homelessness, and those crimes include public urination and prostitution. And to swing this back around, gang, when you make certain crimes unprosecutable, more and more people will actually do it. There was a story just a few months ago where a guy in San Francisco in a grocery store took a dump, literally pulled his pants down, took a dump in the middle of an aisle in a grocery store. 20 years ago, that would have been unthinkable. Today, I mean, the guy didn't have to be high. The guy didn't have to have a mental disability, a mental illness, or anything like that. Could have just been, hey, I need to go. It's too far, to walk to the bathroom. If I can take a dump in the street, I can take a dump here. You know what? Potato, potato. That's what you get. When you say, okay, these things that used to be crimes, they are really no longer crimes because we're not going to prosecute them. More and more and more people will actually say, oh, okay, this is more behavior that I actually can get away with. And so you actually create more crime. You create more and more disorder for people, again, who are just trying to make a living. And here is an interesting factoid that no one has bothered to actually put together. People who say we have to decriminalize things like marijuana. Because, kids are always going to use it. I mean, sometimes that's the utilitarian argument. It's not that, well, it's a matter of freedom. FYI, it's not. We'll have to do a whole video about that one of these days soon. But there's the utilitarian argument. Well, kids are going to be kids, right? High school students, college students, they're going to sneak out. They're going to smoke pot. You know what? Everyone does it. They're going to keep doing it. They're just rebelling. So if we just decriminalize it, it will actually, everyone will benefit in the long run. Parents, the kids, the professors, law enforcement, they'll all benefit. What no one has actually bothered to consider is that, yeah, these kids are doing it because they are rebelling. They're trying to actually see how far they can push the boundaries before they're going to get a slap on the wrist, before someone actually pushes back. This is what everyone does. They're trying to see what behavior they can actually get away with. Well, when your act of rebellion is no longer an act of rebellion because, you know what, it's just a normalized part of life now. You have to find another way to actually rebel. Kids aren't all of a sudden going to stop rebelling simply because pot has been legalized, unless you go in and actually drastically change human nature. So you automatically escalate what kids are going to do in order to rebel, in order to be kids. And then you get into this perpetual cycle. Well, we decriminalize this, to make everyone's lives easier. Well, this new thing, yeah, that's kind of a bit more serious. The kids are doing that to rebel. Well, we'll just decriminalize that and everything will be good. And then repeat ad nauseum, ad nauseum, ad nauseum. And one final point to this, gang. Decriminalization on anything only works when you actually have a moral, principled people. The vast majority of them are honest to God, trying every single day to control themselves, to control their desires, to walk the straight and narrow. But when you live in a society that laughs at honor, that laughs at self-control, that laughs at self-respect, then you combine that with decriminalization, and you have the perfect Venn diagram for everything to eventually go to hell. All it's going to take is a match on the powder keg. That is what you have to keep in mind with stories like this, and that is story number 1.